Yeah, good morning, everyone. Great to hear you and have this nice connection with our community here. So thank you for being on this morning. And today we're going to talk about pain and inflammation. And it's so interesting because pain and inflammation are very interrelated. They coexist typically together, and one can cause the other. You can have something that causes a painful event, or trauma, and it'll become inflamed, or you can have a low-grade inflammation that will eventually show up as pain. So that's why they're usually talked about together. When you work on restoring one, the other one gets lifted. So let's jump in and talk about pain and inflammation. First of all, what is inflammation? And it's your body's way to protect itself from injury, infections, and other pathogens that we're exposed to. And it can be beneficial when it comes to acute injuries and illness. That means something that happens in the moment. But if it turns chronic, if it stays there for a long time, it can last for months or years, and it can become harmful to your health. We hear about two typical types of inflammation. That's acute and chronic. But Dr. Chris and I also talk about silent inflammation, and this is something that goes on for time, over time, and we don't feel it, we don't sense it, but it's happening. And a real typical area that the body will have silent inflammation before something happens is in the gut. We don't feel a lot of things in the gut, or there's silent inflammation if you're building up cholesterol and then somebody has a heart attack. It doesn't mean, that people will go to the doctor and they'll hear, oh, no, everything is just fine, all your blood work is good. And then we hear of many cases of where somebody has an instance of like a heart attack within days after going to the doctor. They had that silent inflammation going on. So even though we can't feel it, we know that it's there for most of us, and it has to do so much with our environment. And when we talk about inflammation, if we don't take care of it, and become proactive with helping that silent inflammation before it becomes chronic, it will become chronic and it'll cause problems. Dr. Chris, do you have anything to add before I move into some of these factors that cause inflammation?
Well, let's look at the next slide where it shows how the body goes through this progression.
Nope, I haven't done that yet.
Okay.
So the 7 factors that can cause inflammation are, number 1, eating inflammatory foods. So when we look at the foods, we're gonna look at those in detail, because it's really important that you eliminate a certain type of foods. Blood sugar imbalances, those are caused a lot by those inflammatory foods. There's the leaky gut syndrome. That's when we have this inflammation going on, or this process inside the gut where our tight junctions are moving apart and the gut is not functioning well. And then we have chronic stress. How many of us have stress right now? Many, many. When it becomes chronic, it'll cause inflammation if we're not sleeping well, environmental toxins, and then chronic infections.
Well, here we go with the degeneration that happens with stress and trauma. So we've talked before about the 5 phases of retracing, and we're showing here what happens when you have a stress or constant trauma. You go on a downward degenerative process through the body. We show how first we go into excretion phase, and then irritation and inflammation. And then, but what's important to realize is that if you make these conscious choices to start changing your diet, take something that helps the body rejuvenate, then you can reverse this process. And the focus today is what we're going to talk about is that silent inflammation that starts out, and it's really the irritation phase. In the next slide, you see the 3 areas that really are impacted. because irritation shows up, as redness, swelling, and a dull pain starts in the body. And this is a low-grade inflammation that oftentimes is just ignored. We'll just take some type of analgesic, like an aspirin or an anti-inflammatory, and just go on with our day. But if we don't deal with the cause, it exacerbates, it gets worse. And this is the inflammation that Dr. Tina mentioned as far as it gets enhanced. So it's really important that we understand that only 1 out of 10 in this country has metabolic health, and the rest of us have some form of chronic metabolic disorder. And that's like diabetes, cardiovascular disease, some other chronic degenerative condition. But when we talk about metabolic imbalance, we mean that you're at these beginning stages here of you're pre-diabetic. You have a fatty liver that you don't feel it, but it's starting to congest and clog and disrupt all the functions in the body. We have excess body fat that's filled with pro-inflammatory bad fats from our diets. So this is the 3 categories that these 9 out of 10 individuals that have these metabolic disorders. And to understand metabolism again, it's how we make energy. It's how efficient our immune system functions. Remember, our immune system is our body's operating system. And because our diets and supplements are linked to our metabolism, we can all now better understand our emphasis on, importance of taking your teleyouth and supporting that teleyouth with a healthy diet and lifestyle. So as Dr. Tina mentioned, inflammation is not always a bad thing. In fact, it's our immune system. It's how it fights off infections using inflammatory processes to kill foreign, invaders, no matter what the microbe is. But on a modern day diet of refined oils and sugars, a person's fighting a serious infection of any kind can likely suffer an inability to control the inflammatory process. So what's happening is that we're seeing what's going on here today is that we've got this global pandemic with a virus that's not really that virulent, meaning it's not lethal, it's not that powerful, but from the microbial perspective, it's very contagious. So when it's released in the population, a lot of people get infected. And because, as we said, 9 out of 10 of us is already compromised and in an inflammatory state, then we see things get exacerbated and accelerated. So the risk factor is just being amplified here, and we're seeing it in our today's situations that we're experiencing. So remember, you have an opportunity to reverse this process. The sclerotic state, the hardened tissue can all of a sudden get circulation and immunity again. And that might not be comfortable. It could be inflammatory because it's reversing the process and your immune system is working, it's kicking in again, but it's under control. It doesn't get out of control. And so this is all to help you understand a little bit of that pain and inflammation process that goes on. Dr. Tina.
Yeah, great point. So if you're in phases 3 or 4 of this retracing and you're taking your teleyouth, as that energy production comes back, you're going to go from sclerotic back to inflammation, back to that low-grade inflammation. And just know it is part of the healing process. It's not a bad thing. And you have the ability, you have the ability to slow it down or increase it by how much teleyouth you take and some of the other things that you do. So when we look at, what happens when we end up with chronic inflammation, these are the ways that can damage your body. We can have memory loss and cognitive decline. Our Alzheimer's and dementia is really off the charts with our elderly. Increased cardiovascular risk abnormal growth of healthy cells, compromised digestive function. Interestingly enough, we know that the digestion is usually the first function to really start to degrade the rest of the body. That becomes compromised first. We'll have that loss of muscle tone, weight gain, accelerated skin aging, and then look, joint pain and loss of mobility. Any of these things can happen, and then 2 or 3 of them can happen. So it just depends on where your body is at.
And one of the keys is that loss of sleep, right? So we lose energy, we lose resiliency, this greater stress that we're experiencing, not just from the outside, but now from the inside, because our body is going through this low-grade inflammatory state. So this increases cortisols, because that's the stress response. That's how our body responds to stress. And cortisol, we need it. That's how we make energy. It's so critical to our daily function. But when it's constant, when it's out of balance, and then it triggers poor sleep. And one of the main reasons and the ways that it does that is because we need melatonin for good sleep, and melatonin is an antagonist to cortisol. That means that cortisol, when it's overabundant, suppresses the melatonin release, because stress always overrides the healing and the repairing response. So our bodies are designed to, run from the tiger before we need to digest our food or to get good sleep. So the cortisol will dominate. So the ability to turn that off and to regulate that cortisol is so critical. And this is why we impress upon you, Teleyouth is so special, because it has the ability to mediate stress by as much as 50%. So that's talking about shutting down that cortisol expression, that cortisol release by as much as 50% if necessary. And it does it according to the stress in your life. So it's not like a drug that forces your body. It's a nutrient, it's a food that facilitates the mediation, the regulation. So one of the first responses most individuals get from Teleyouth is a deeper, better sleep. And the reason for that is because the cortisol is reduced and the melatonin is expressed. And now you've got all these wonderful benefits that come from melatonin. And on the next slide, we're going to give you some of that information here.
Exactly. And getting a good night's sleep is non-negotiable. We can't express that enough. When it comes to your health and well-being, it's when your body gets to rest, it gets to recover, it gets to promote healing, it gets to reverse that process of retracing that Dr. Chris was talking about.
So here are the benefits of melatonin and actually what you get from the benefits of Teleyouth, because melatonin not only means more good healing and restful sleep, but it's so critical to our immune response. It increases cell regeneration. So this is the nighttime repair that's so important. So the things that start to regenerate and repair and causes that reversal from going from sclerosis to inflammation to low-grade inflammation to eventually just repair and healing of the tissue. It's a powerful antioxidant and free radical scavenger, and we always hear about how important that is. And it helps balance estrogen in both men and women. And this is important because later in life, we don't produce the full range of the hormones or estrogens that the body needs. And when this gets out of balance, this is when it predisposes us to abnormal growths. It's a really important component to cancer prevention. And then stimulates the immune system, the T lymphocytes that are so important to be our first line of defense, and ultimately just create just a strong, healthy immunity, which is, again, that programmer for the rest of the functions in the body. And when we say it's a key substance to our circadian rhythms, that means that we get the good sleep at night and we wake up alert and just energized, and during the day we just digest our food better, we think better, we're stronger. And then as the day winds down, our body clock again is regulated by this melatonin release and helps us go back into that sleep and repair cycle. Dr. Tina, anything you'd like to add to that?
It's so important that we have that melatonin. I did have a question come in this last week after we talked about melatonin. And the question was this: well, isn't it okay that I take melatonin at night, to help me go to sleep? And one of the things that we like to express is that if your body can make it, please don't take it. If you need it for a short period of time, that's fantastic. But we want your body to regulate itself so that you don't override its production, its own production of being able to make its own melatonin. So long term, it's not that great to be taking something if your body can make it.
That's such an important point that you make, Dr. Tina, because unless you're traveling and you've got a time change, then we say melatonin's fine to get your body clock back in rhythm. But when you take something artificially that the body normally makes itself, remember, it's all connected. Every one of our systems is connected: the immune system, the cardiovascular system, the endocrine, the nervous system. And the release of these powerful molecules play a role in all the other different systems, so that when we take it artificially, we break the feedback loops that communicate to all the other systems. So I'm just really glad you brought that up.
And here's another situation that causes that silent inflammation. And the reason being, this is silent to us. We don't really feel most of the time or experience this particular toxin that we're all being exposed to. When we're exposed to 4G, the example I give is it's like a 2-lane highway. But now that we have 5G installed or being installed across America, it's like this frequency of being on a 8-lane highway without speed limits. It's so much more intense. And we need this good, healthy spectrum of light, as you can see on this electromagnetic spectrum. But anything on the left-hand side or the right-hand side, when we get exposed to that, it's very, very toxic, especially because we're constantly exposed to it. We don't get a break from it anymore. And what this does is it really breaks down our system. One of the ingredients that we have in Youth is chaga mushroom. And thankfully, our chaga mushroom is the super protector, and it has vast amounts of melanin in it. And that helps our body to protect itself from this other stressor, these EMFs, these other frequencies, because every cell in our body has an antenna. So if you think of that, we are walking antennas, and we sense this, we pick up this energetic frequency from all ends of this spectrum. And so we have to be able to protect ourselves from this stressor, and we do it naturally when we take our Youth. What happens when we get that 5G EMF? This is important to know, that we get excess calcium infused into our cells. And when that happens, our cells mutate. We end up with excess free radicals. They destroy the cells, the healthy cells. We have B12 imbalances. Lots of different functions really affect our 5G affects many different functions of our cell, and that accelerates the pain, the inflammation in the body. Dr. Chris, do you have anything to add as well?
It's really important just to, again, know that this is the science behind what's happening with the EMFs, and very few individuals are aware of it. So it's impacting us right at the core level of our cells, and our cells are what makes up everything else that happens in the body.
Yeah, I find it interesting when somebody will say, but I have a great healthy diet, I have a great lifestyle, why is it I'm still feeling pain? And when we sometimes narrow it down to EMF frequencies, it's amazing when you start to realize that these kinds of frequencies can be so damaging.
And definitely take us out of our cycle with the, going to sleep at night when we turn on that computer after sunset. It's that blue light that makes us think it's 12 in the afternoon and shuts off the melatonin, right?
Absolutely.
Well, here you see, the regeneration process that happens and that is so dynamically supported by teleyouth. And so when a cell is in need of repair or it's under stress, it sends out signals, and all the ingredients in teleyouth support the signaling process naturally in the body. So we're not replacing anything. We're giving the body foods that facilitate its ability to do the signaling. And this is so critical because stem cells in their own right are anti-inflammatory. We've learned in stem cell therapies as practitioners, they'll inject a joint with stem cells to reduce its inflammation. This is how they're getting around joint replacements with knees and hips. More and more individuals are opting for stem cell therapy. And Dr. Tina and I have had the opportunity to talk to many stem cell doctors, and they love our product in between their therapies because before and after, because what happens is that with teleyouth, you're reducing the inflammatory response, and then when they inject the stem cells, more of the stem cells are used to regenerate and repair instead of just doing the reduction of inflammation. So they're not wasted in any way. So you see this whole response of just signaling the activation of the release of the stem cells from the bone marrow, which we support the production, and the regeneration of the bones to have that pool of stem cells available. And then, of course, the activation that happens with the FTE, the fertilized tissue extract, and the L-arginine that supports that whole process.
Exactly.
Anything to add?
I do. So you have stem cell therapy in a bottle with teleyouth because this process is so supported. And you have that's why we see pain and inflammation, the fire go out inside the body. And when that happens, that's part of the rejuvenation process. But when we get that fire even lower, that's when you start to really see that rejuvenation process happen. What else can you do to relieve the pain and inflammation? What can you do to support your teleyouth? These are the healthy lifestyle choices. So important. Sugar and refined carbs and bad fats. Start removing them from your diet. Do not be fooled. Even if you go to a co-op or you go to a healthy food, what you think is a healthy food place, and you get some packaged foods like from Whole Foods or any of the other great grocers, they will include in their recipes a lot of canola oil. And Dr. Chris is going to talk about that in the next slide. But you need to be just aware that these are the things to really get out of your diet to reduce that inflammation. Bring in your healthy fats. Take your hot soak baths and Epsom salts. That helps. Cold therapy. When we talk about athletes, a lot of times, after their football games or soccer games, they're going in those cold tubs with ice because it works. It helps bring down, think about it, it puts out the fire in the body. Change the amount of teleyouth you take. You can increase it or decrease it. If you're in that retracing process and it's too difficult for you, go ahead and reduce it and do some of these other things to help your lifestyle. If you're not, if that doesn't bother you, increase your teleyouth and you'll get through the process quicker. So just depends on your personal choice there. Make sure you're walking or doing some light yoga, real light exercise, because you need to be able to get the lymphatics moving and the toxins moving out of your body. Make certain that your body is eliminating its wastes. Very key, very important. And if you're not, find a way to support that. so that you can move that out of the body, and then rest, rest, rest. Very, very important, as we've talked about. Here are some of the pro-inflammatory foods that we talked about earlier. Things you need to move at the bottom here, those refined grains, the whole grains, the grain flour products, deep fried foods that has the bad fats, processed foods, grain-fed meats, fast food. It's just, you can just see it's pretty common sense. Most of your salad dressings, by the way, that you buy, and those vegetable oils, you want to remove those. When we look at the top of this chart, these are the things you want to focus on. This is what you want to bring in to your diet and lifestyle. And take a picture of this slide. Make sure you have this close by, and make these choices when you're looking at your food. You want to just make sure that the more you incorporate these, the more it's going to help rebuild all of your cells, reduce the inflammation in the body, and you'll get through that process a lot faster. Dr. Chris, I know you want to talk about those bad oils, bad fats.
Well, this is what we're always educating individuals on, because let's say our culture isn't looking out for us. We go to the different restaurants, especially the fast food restaurants, and all these processed foods are made with highly inflammatory oils. And this is what's saturating our body fat. And when our body fat is filled with these bad fats that come from refined seed oils, this is why we're in this constant state of inflammation, and explains how, the medical community is realizing that 9 out of 10 of us has some type of metabolic disorder because of these pro-inflammatory states that just don't go away because it's saturated into our system. So we lose the regulatory capacity of the inflammatory response. Remember, our immune system creates inflammation to protect us, but then we can overreact with a cytokine storm, when we're exposed to some type of microbe, because we don't have the control or regulation of the inflammatory response. And this is what we're seeing in today's pandemic. We're seeing so many individuals that are already inflamed, and then they get exposed to some microbe, and that microbe just overwhelms the system, and they go into this inflammatory storm, cytokine storm, or else they stay in a chronic degenerative state where the immune system doesn't shut down, and then it creates a lot of degeneration. And if it's in the joints, it's arthritis. If it's in the soft tissue, it's lupus. If it's in the nervous system, it becomes multiple sclerosis. So now you can understand how all these chronic degenerative conditions are so tied in with stress and the specific stressors we get from our diets. So remember, go ahead.
It's so true. I always wondered how some people could eat this stuff and not gain an ounce, and they would be fine. And I was like, why can't, geez, I had ice cream and it was like, I look at ice cream and gain weight, or you just wonder, your genetics play such a huge role with this as well. And so you have to listen to your body. You have to hear your feedback mechanisms and really pay attention when you're looking at your diet choices, because your body will tell you what's working. And so we can't tell you enough how you have to stay so in tune in every moment with your body as well.
I like to just put a little fear factor in my patients. I said, you ever heard of varnish? It's what carpenters use to finish wood, meaning to protect it after they've designed something. Well, varnish is made from these vegetable oils, the soy, the flaxseed, the canola, all the things that are highly refined and processed in our foods. And these are called PUFAs. These are the polyunsaturated fatty acids, and they react heavily to oxygen. So unless you're taking flaxseed that is cold processed, and it's made in a nitrogen environment so that it's not exposed to oxygen. It's not good for you. So we're just trying to help you understand is that all these seed oils that are inexpensive and commercially used in our processed foods are so damaging to our body, and why we're seeing so much chronic degenerative disease today, because they not only promote free radical damage, but they impact our mitochondria, which is our energy, our enzymes, which is the activators of all the functions in the body, the hormone receptors. So it's so important. And Dr. Tina, you show this chart, and it gives examples of the good oils, the avocado oil, the good fats, the butter, the ghee, and the coconut oil, olive oil, peanut oil. And then when you see things like sesame oil, flaxseed oil, walnut oil, these are fine as long as they're cold pressed and unrefined. And that's the term you got to look for. If it says cold pressed but it's refined, it's still not good. It's got to be cold processed and unrefined. Otherwise, you're consuming varnish. That's all I can say.
Thank you. And it's not good for your brain. It's not good for your arteries. It's not good for your organs. So you want to make sure that you're eliminating those.
Well, thank you all for joining us today. I hope you just get a little bit more information. It's these talks are educational purposes only. They're not designed to treat, cure, or ameliorate any type of disease. That's why you go to your doctor and your healthcare practitioner. And we just appreciate you joining us, and just stay tuned for our next educational call.
Yeah, and we're going to open it up. So thank you, everyone. We're going to go ahead and open it for any comments or questions. We do have a question that came in this last week to answer.